All right. Welcome back, everybody. So there's a couple small things we want to do before we move on to a really big piece of this application involving talking to a server, getting data back. One order of business. It'd be really nice to see line numbers in our margins. And I neglected to do this in the first video in the series, but if you go up here to Xcode Preferences and then Text Editing and check that little box at the top, line numbers, you'll see line numbers show up. An incredibly useful tool. So now that we've got that going, we can make mistakes and know how to identify their location. Cross that off my list. One other thing that I want to do, we need to change this line of code because we are not taking advantage of the interface builder file that we are about to build into something complex and magical. So we want to change this line of code to not just register a class, but we want to register an interface builder file. So we would type the following. And you'll see in Xcode's autocomplete here, there are two register class methods and two register nib methods. We're going to choose, the first register nib method because we're registering this nib for a cell, not for a header or a footer view. So I am going to just put this little placeholder variable in here. And the cell reuse identifier, we can just use exactly what we had before. That's okay for the time being. I'm going to get rid of that line. And now I need to make a nib. And let's do this like so. Nib name. This nib name is video cell. And the bundle is nil. So what do we just do? A nib is an object that we can create that essentially references our interface builder file, the contents of that file. So we're basically registering this nib, this interface builder file, with the table view so that the table view uses that nib when it creates its cells. So we pass in the nib name, which is exactly what it says right here. That's the name we gave it initially. And that's it. We just make this two-line change to make sure that we're taking advantage of our interface builder file. And if we go over here to our interface builder file and we click on the content view there, and let's say we go down here to background color and we choose our favorite salmon color and we hit run, we should see each cell change to be that color. There we go. So the 5 cells that actually hold content that are populated with names from our strings are now this kind of nice, kind of not so nice salmon color, and we're good to go. That means that is confirmation that we are actually, our nib is being used to create those cells, which gives us free license to move on from here and do some interesting stuff within this cell. So let's do something right off the bat here. Maybe I want to add a label to my cell, and I can kind of change the bounds of my cell. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger to give myself some room. And I'm going to drag a label in here, and I'm going to put it in the lower left-hand corner. And I want to be able to work with this label in code. So I'm going to create a property on my video cell class. I'm going to call it name label. And it's of type UI label, which of course you can option click to view the documentation on that. And it's an optional. All interface builder outlets must be optional. If I come over here and I click on this guy, I'm going to draw a connection just like we did for our table view from the connections inspector here from the referencing outlet section. I'm going to draw this blue line over to the video cell itself and release, and I will see name label, the name of the property I just created in that list, and I will click that. It will flash here to say the connection is made, and I can again confirm that this circle is filled in to further confirm that the connection is made. I then want to change the label to be white. We're going to make this look much better later on, but just for the sake of getting it looking moderately good, I'm going to change the text color to white. And now I'm going to set up some constraints for my label. I'm going to do so in this little constraints editor menu right here, the pin board. I am going to uncheck this box because I don't want these kind of 8-point artificial margins. I'm going to choose a nice round number of 10 for the bottom left and right. And I'm going to hit add to constraints. You know what? I'm actually going to do the same over here. So bottom, left, and right. This label will be no more than 10 pixels. No less than 10 pixels from the edge there. So I'm going to hit add 3 constraints. I'm going to see this little kind of orange number and a dotted line that is also orange, which is a little hard to see. I can resolve that by saying update frames. And that's basically saying this label looks, as it's positioned on the canvas right now, different from what it will look like when we resolve the constraints, when auto layout takes the constraints that we've set up and actually does something with them. What else can we do here? I am further going to, with my label selected, go into the measurements inspector here. And I'm going to do a couple things. Let's see. I want to make sure with my label that it's one line, and indeed the default is a one-line label, so this will prevent it from overflowing. I can also look at the line break mode, and I'm interested in truncate tail. We're not going to have any names in here that are terribly long, but we might have some that overflow the cell, and I don't want to flow it onto 2 lines. I just want to say it's one line, and I want the tail to be truncated, which means there'll be a small ellipsis at the end. And again, back over here, maybe I want this label to be constrained to the width of the text string that it's displaying. So I might take this trailing space here and click Edit and say that I don't want it to actually be 10 pixels, but I want the constant to be greater than or equal to 10 pixels, which means that this label has the freedom to move from left to right, and it will never go beyond 10 pixels from the edge, from the right-hand edge there. I can also come down here and adjust the content hugging and content compression resistance, and those are what they sound. We can adjust these to be a higher number and say, for this label, please make yourself as close to the size of the text as possible. So the highest number we can choose is 1,000. We can tweak those and be sure that whenever we set the text on this label, that the width of it, at least, and also vertically, though that's less of an issue here, the width will hug the text. So now that we've got that guy in there, why don't we, instead of using this default text label from our cell, why don't we switch to, say, cell.namelabel.text equals this guy here. So let's click stop, and we'll run again and see if our changes have taken effect. All right, doesn't look like much. Let's make some other adjustments to better see the results. So we're going to do a couple things. So one thing that we can do is head over to our staff picks view controller and adjust the table view row height, and we can do that right here. We can say maybe give it a height of 150, and the minute we do that, we see that the placeholder values here change. And if we hit run, we should see that take effect, which will make it clear that our label that we positioned in the lower left is being, pinned where we want it to, and we're no longer using the default label for the cell. Let's make that even more noticeable by perhaps providing a background color for our label so that we can see its bounds. And we can do that by clicking on the background guy here. Rather than the drop-down, we can click on the actual color. Clicking on the color. So why don't we give it like a, let's give it a fully black background, but we're going to make it like 50% opacity, the color. And again, this applies to the background color, not the actual text. And we can see that take effect right away. And if we run again, if we stop and then run again, we should see those guys, the width of them is hugging our text. So if we had a really long name in there, and let's actually try that. Let's do that for good measure just to make sure we're bringing things all the way. Let's say we put something in there that's going to overflow our container no matter what. And let's see if we set things up properly. to handle this really long name. And we did. So we see this really long name is, maintains or respects the margin that we set up on the right-hand side, and it's truncated, so there's a little ellipsis there. So that's pretty nice. So that was just a little housekeeping that I wanted to do before we move on to some bigger and badder things. So with that said, let's do it.